Tori, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Fine, thank you.
Recording in progress.
When I first saw the agenda item count that was presented, I was about to give you a call, but then I realized that I could not stroke out and chill out, and that it was okay.
I should have highlighted that paragraph like, everyone chill out.
Yeah. Chill out. Not the agenda. Not the agenda that at first blush it appears.
Like the worst statement in the world. Calm down.
I'm not calming. It's saying
Hands are cold, which means that you get a warm.
That's all this ones they say. I don't know.
Oh, you it's bad. I just went over there. Pass it around.
boy, yeah, you. Sometime that's where I'm learning about you. Especially back here, it's just one of these post-COVID stuff.
Yeah.
The young people,
Thank you, Scott. I really appreciate it.
become a leader.
Yeah.
So,
5 minutes says fair. Something like that.
you have no reason to know but the Sexton and quit.
Oh, really?
There's no plan to replace them. They have a contract, so it's janitorial.
Well, I know that, Deanna had started asking me to lock up the church. So he said I was ushering. Now it's asking ushering to lock it up. Or at least lock us. The staff has had personnel problems. But she retired one.
That's such a tough job.
Yeah, one guy that came in and we realized that he thought that the termite bomb was too expensive, so he stopped doing it. Like 2 or 3 years with no coverage.
Right. What do we do with all this extra time?
I know you're ready to go this morning. Go this afternoon. We're recording.
Sure, I missed something.
We're good. This is good.
So I got a stand-up routine.
This is much different than our last year. I think I've had 2 relatively carefree years and carefree for 2 relatively light years on the talking screeching home.
Oh, yeah. I had to go back and watch the TV.
Figure out what happened.
Oh, last time.
Yeah.
We finally got some refereeing from the lawyers. Which said
Like this.
brain damage.
We all have to abstain.
As you said, we'll see if this can be our shortest on the agenda.
Yeah. swear someday I'm gonna bring a can of WD-40.
And that's what you hear on the
Oh, yeah.
right. It's always, it's
Microphones.
the last one.
It's time to look so, okay.
Microphones have.
That's what you hear predominantly
Amplify all that stuff.
every time.
Try to sit stock still.
The recording.
Lawrence, you ready? It's your pleasure. Okay. Corey, all set?
Right.
Good afternoon and welcome to the October 26, 2022 BAR Large in-person meeting at the Lenny Krawcheck Room at 2 George Street. My name is John Robinson. I'm the chairman of the BARL for our proceedings this evening. The other board members present are Jay White, Luda Sobchuk, James Metters, and Seton Brown, accompanied by city staff, Tori Parrish, our city architect, and Lawrence Courtney, staff architect. For those of you who are not familiar with our agenda, the order of the meeting for any individual presentation will be as follows. First, there's an introduction or overview of the project by city staff to the board and for the benefit of the public. There's then an application presentation of 10 minutes or as extended by the chair, accompanied or followed by any and all questions to the applicant for board or staff. Any and all presenters appearing should state their name for the record. Persons affiliated with the project and speaking on its behalf, be they the owners, developers, designers, or others, should speak during this portion of the meeting rather than following portions of the meeting. This period is followed by written public comment, which has been submitted in advance and digested and disseminated to the board. Written public comment is not read into the record unless the chairman determines it is necessary. We don't believe that's necessary tonight. This is followed by public comment for anyone visiting with us here this evening. Public comments should have a 2-minute time limit, or they can be extended with some reasonably by the chair. The applicant should not respond to any public comments, be they written or orally done this evening. The same rule applies to anyone speaking as a member of the public. They need to state their name and address for the record. Public comment is followed by city staff comments and recommendations on any given agenda item. The applicant is then given a 5-minute period to respond or clarify either to public comments or the city staff comments and recommendations. This should have a 5-minute time limit. And after that, the applicant can speak if called upon by the chair. The applicant needs to raise their hand, wishes to be addressed. We'll take that up in due course. This is also the opportunity for the applicant to clarify any inaccurate information that may have been presented either by the public or the city. This is followed by board discussion and vote on any agenda item. Theoretically, at this point, the applicant presentation and public comment period is closed. Again, if there's a need to clarify inaccurate information or an applicant is called upon, they may be recognized by the chair. As a procedural note, item number 2, 295 Calhoun Street has been tabled until the November 9th, 2022 meeting per our previous board motion of October 12th, 2022. This is a friendly reminder to members of the public with us this evening to turn off or silence cell phones and other disruptive devices. This is also a friendly substantive reminder to those of you with us this evening that comments should be limited to architecture and aesthetics only before this board. Comments relating to zoning or parking or traffic or lot coverage or livability concerns are not the purview of this board and therefore should not be addressed here. Additional information for the benefit of the public. Information on each application, including all documents submitted by the applicant by the deadline, as well as post-meeting results and staff comments, are available at charleston-sc.gov/BAR. You can obviously, if you're here tonight, you know how to participate in person. We have lots of people watching us on the YouTube live stream, which is also recorded and indexed that anyone can go back and see previous meetings. A reminder for those who are interested in submitting written public comments in the future, the deadline to submit written public comments is 12 p.m. on the Tuesday before this meeting, so noon the day before on that Tuesday. Comments, just as if they were in person, require name, address, contact information, meeting date, and the item they want to be heard on. Again, those comments are furnished to the board 24 hours in advance of the meeting and are in fact considered as part of our deliberations. Additionally, members of the public may call and leave a message at 843-724-3781 or mail comments by snail mail to 2 George Street, Charleston, South Carolina, 29401. Some of this is redundant, but I'll just do it for the benefit of the public. The applicants and all their team members have been required to register and submit all documents well in advance of the meeting. Staff, Lawrence, controls any particular slide presentation, and all the applicant needs to do, or staff or board members need to do, is tell Lawrence which slide they wish to go to. Applicants, staff, and board members are required to give their name whenever speaking. Public comment, same deal. Identify yourself and address. Members of the public who wish to be heard during the public portion should announce name and address for the record. Board members will be chaired by the chairperson, shall be polled by the chairperson for comments on their vote on each motion or agenda item. Each member when voting should respond yea in favor or nay not in favor. If I have misstated anyone's motion on any agenda item or any procedural matter, the board member should correct me before proceeding, as that has certainly happened before. And again, all results of tonight's meeting are at charleston-sc.gov/BAR. With that, Ms. Parrish, I believe we're ready to take up agenda item number 1, the approval of the minutes from our last meeting.
That's right.
Can I have a motion? Mr. Metters has moved. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Brown seconds. All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Okay.
And I abstained from that one since I wasn't here.
Thank you, Mr. White. for
Even
clarifying.
recognizing the
Yes.
huge number of board members.
That's okay. As we noted, agenda item number 2, 295 Calhoun Street, has been tabled to the November 9th meeting. That brings us to agenda item number 3, 63 Columbus Street.
Right, 63 Columbus Street is in the East Side neighborhood. The school was constructed in 1956, the existing portion. Height District 2.5 to 3, Old City District. This application is requesting preliminary approval of support building for the early college high school on the site of the Fraser Elementary, incorporating the existing Fraser Columbus Street facade as well as new construction. The location of the school on the east side of Hempstead Mall. The existing building from Columbus Street. Ready for the applicant's presentation?
You're good. Mr. Clark.
Thank you. Good evening. Andy Clark with Leo Architecture. I want to go to slide 2. Get started with here for preliminary approval. We weren't here for conceptual and highlighted in red some of the responses to that. The 4 key things that we responded to we'll show you in this presentation. Number 1 was continue corresponding with the neighborhood groups on incorporating community history into the interior of the building. We have had 4 great meetings with ECDC as well as a community public meeting to continue to gather input and have some history to share with us in the facility itself. The second one is the clear story, and the comment was to study pushing it back further away from the historic facade, and we have done that. I think it works nicely. We'll show you that as we move forward. The other was to study the facade along Hampstead Square with the multi-purpose room. We've incorporated some brick detailing that we'll show you with some Flemish bond details to help with that facade. And similarly on the Drake Street facade, where we have a kitchen and a blank wall, we've incorporated some panels on that side with brick detailing and Flemish bond details as well. With that being said, Lawrence, we can move to slide 11 and go through some of these fairly quickly. Some of the previous information of the context that's already been shared. Slide 11 shows you the conceptual and preliminary site plans. You can see that very little has changed on the site. If you go to the next slide, you get a little bit better idea. The main entry is through Columbus Street, through the historic entry portal of Wilmot J. Frazier Elementary School. We do have the bus entrance on the Hampstead Square side, and the Drake Street is an exit-only egress for life safety, with the car dropping off on the south side, going through the student courtyard, and just another note that below that parking is subsurface stormwater retention to improve the stormwater in the region. Next slide. So this slide shows you an overlay of the current footprint with the new footprint, and really shows how we tried to keep it as compact as possible to be respectful to the residential neighbors both on the west and the east. Next slide, please. This shows you the historic facade. As you may recall, we're preserving the historic facade that faces Columbus Street. The area in red shows you the extent of that facade to be preserved. So there's an extensive effort being made to retain that during construction and then reincorporate to bring that back to its historic look. On the next slide, you'll see the second floor that shows you the same red line of the facade will be preserved. The next slide. So this is the existing route plan, and essentially it will all be removed and replaced with the new construction. Next. So here you see the floor plans. Again, most of the development between last time and this time has been interior development. Most of the administrative functions on the Columbus Street side and the historic footprint, with the high volume spaces such as multi-purpose room and cafeteria in the new additions. Next. So here on this slide, this is the first floor plan. You can see the white area in the middle, the very wide corridor, we're calling that the promenade. That serves two purposes. One is to allow for the circulation between the historic building that was preserved and the new addition to the south. And two, that area is where the history of the east side and the history of Wilmot J. Frazier Elementary will be showcased, as well as the history of Early College High School. So some exciting opportunities in there. Next slide, you'll see the second floor plan. And most of the academic spaces are on this floor. You have some science labs and some of the Avid classrooms, academic labs, and senior Avid. So some great spaces for the students in this program. The next slide really highlights the change of the clear story at the new addition. You see on the left the outline of the clear story that was very close to the existing facade. We pushed that back a significant amount, as you see on the lower right. And on the next slide, you'll see a larger view of that. So you can see how far back the pop-up clear story is away from the historic facade. It really recedes from view from public way. And you can also see on this slide the 3 mechanical screens. And we've designed those to hide the rooftop equipment, but also to be sensitive to the volumes of the spaces below, not asymmetrically placed. Next. I think you can go through some of these streetscape elevations and advance to slide 26, please. Okay, on this slide, we start to look at some of the exterior materials. And you see we have some of those proposed materials on the table here in front of you, along with the mass model there as well. Starting in the bottom right, you can see we are working with Phillips Simmons Foundation to come up with a design to incorporate some of the history. They are there on the east side, and they're working with a team to come up with a design that can be used to pay some respect to that history of his ironwork. The plan is to make that out of some type of aluminum. But until we have the design, we don't know, but we're working with them to come up with a design for that. Aluminum storefront for the new windows. You can see some of the mechanical screen walls. Using a common bond veneer pattern that matches the historic, but a slightly different color. We've matched the colors of the brick to the existing, but changed the proportions. So where the existing is approximately 60% red with some burgundy and copper accents, the proposed is about 60% burgundy with copper and red accents, so complementary but differentiated. And then at the hyphen area in between, a lighter color accent brick that you see, the pearl gray color that's on the table. Next slide. So you can see the elevations of existing, previous, and current. As you can see here, it hasn't changed very much. As the clear story moved back away from Columbus, there was no need for those windows up there, so there are a few less windows on the clear story, but that provides access for MEP components and ceiling heights. Next. Again, very similar on this slide at the bottom, you can see that we've reduced the length of the bus canopy to stay further away from the residential and to not block the entrance on that Hampstead Square side. On the next slide, you see the Drake Street elevation, and on this one really highlights the addition of the brick panels and some of the brick patterning to make that kitchen facade a little more appealing. Next slide. And this is the south side from the parking lot area. You can see on the bottom the new proposed, we've added some sunshades, as well as added some windows into the multi-purpose. Really added some more brick details on that side to tie together with the other elevations. Right, next, you can go through these. These are some of the other partial elevations, just to show some of the sides that aren't as prominent. You can keep going. Here's some of the light fixtures. You can see the top left, that's the very subtle, modern-looking light fixture that goes on the historic building. Very simple and plain to kind of hide and fade into the background. And then the rest of the required lighting on the building, very simple and a shame. So we have some building sections to give you a sense of how the clear story at the pop-up has pushed back away from the road. We can go through that fairly quickly. And then some wall sections showing the existing wall and how the new windows interface with that. We have some other wall sections that go through the new construction area to show coping details, head jam and sill details. And then we have enlargements. You can keep going. There's some enlarged details there as well. On this slide, this gives you a kind of a blow-up of the brick detailing. That Flemish bond with projected headers gives some texture and some shadow in between the windows at each floor. Next slide. And these show the typical coping details at each of the conditions, as well as some mechanical screen wall details. Next, you'll see some head jam and sill details. This is a new window and a historic opening, a new opening in the historic wall with a new window. And on the next page, you'll see some new windows in the new wall construction. Happy to answer questions on those if there are any that I think we can go through. And then the bus canopy detail to show you how we kept that off the sidewalk and cantilevered it out so it's over to the campsite square side. Next. And then the top right, you can see a detail of how the historic construction transitions to the new with some salvaged brick, turning that corner where we've had to demolish some of the existing building, preserving the salvaged brick and then retying those in just at that corner condition. Next. And this shows the fence detail that goes around the perimeter. Obviously, school security is a huge component in today's schools, and we're working closely with CCSD security to come up with a fence that keeps the students safe, as well as looking at the zoning requirements for height. And we're still working through that with them, but the proposal now is we've got brick piers and a brick base with metal pickets above, and realize that if there's any requirement for variance, we would go through BZA, but we think we can work within that and create a safe fence. The traditional standard would be a vinyl coated chain link or something of that nature. So the district's committed in this location to do this type of fence detail. So in these you can see the before and after of the renderings. The top right, the new Columbus Street preliminary, you can see how pushing the clear story back away from Columbus, it really is almost not visible from the public way. And on the bottom right, you can see how the brick detailing along the kitchen facade on the left there really helps to break up that facade. The next slide. This shows you essentially on the top right the reduction of the bus canopy length and some minor changes to the new windows. One of the points of the study was to make the new windows in the historic facade really look like they're new and not match the existing. So we've got some different details in that location. And the bottom right, really can't see much change in that view before and now. Next slide. Finally, looking at the rear from the parking area, you can see on the left that we've added sunshades and some brick detailing, and also did some printing of the landscaping there. So that's about it. Next slide, please. And I think the last four are just enlarged views of the current proposed renderings. So if you can just scroll through those. And with that, be happy to answer any questions the board has, and appreciate your time.
Mr. Matters already quick on the draw. Yes.
Andy, I gotta find my question. So, Lawrence, on page 27. So in the proposed, while the clerestory's been set back, how many additional feet?
About 10 feet further than it was previously.
10 feet further than it was, but we've removed the windows in the two middle sections, right?
Correct. Yeah, those windows previously were giving extra light into the classrooms, but by moving them back, they're too close to the corridor to provide any value to the classrooms at night.
I missed that view from the outside with those clerestories, with those windows. And then the second thing is, so on drawings 21 or 27, either one, I just want to make sure the windows are the same. You know, the highlighting of the windows is different. And I don't know if that's just a function of, graphics.
It is a graphic function, yeah. It's the way the shadows exported on the new, there's no difference.
No difference in tinting or anything like that.
No.
Thank
no.
you, Mr. Chairman.
The glass sample here shows clear glazing.
It's always with the eye for detail. Any more questions from the board or staff at this particular time?
The restudy on the back courtyard fencing, the addition of the brick versus the bar, can you explain why that was done?
So
On looks like at 46. There's an extension of the brick on either side of the main entryway.
yes, so they're in the circulation of getting the ADA access and the ramps to get up to that height and providing, gate access to the stairs and then gate access for the ramp. We needed to have a secure gate that didn't allow someone to try to jump over the gate. So we had to provide a solid wall in that location for security reasons. Having someone have a ledge that they could stand on to jump up over was a security concern for the schools.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Further questions at this particular time? If none, Mr. Clark, we'll give you a break and hit the next part of the meeting. Any member of the public wishing to speak on this agenda item at this time? Mr. Schwebler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Justin Schweller of the Historic Charleston Foundation. I'd like to thank the applicants for taking the time to meet with us over the last few weeks to update us on the project. We think the proposed changes have been thoughtfully considered and well executed, particularly the changes to the clerestory windows and sensitivity to the original historic facade. We happily recommend conceptual or preliminary approval with final review by staff.
Thank you, Mr. Schwebler. For any other member of the public wishing to be heard on this agenda? Hearing none. City staff comments, recommendations.
One staff comment. With minor changes incorporated, this application has appropriately addressed board and staff comments from the conceptual review by reducing the prominence of the clerestory, providing brick treatment on the west wall, and revising the newly punched openings on the existing facade to be differentiated and distinguishable from the original openings. This project continues to preserve the exterior of the front portion facing Columbus Street and to add compatible and sympathetic elements to meet its current program. Staff's recommendation is preliminary approval. Because no significant additional changes are anticipated, staff is comfortable with final review by staff of 4 permit drawings if all materials have been thoroughly examined and approved.
Mr. Clark or someone for the applicant can respond if they want to.
No, thank you.
Okay, good. Very wise. We'll move to board discussion and a vote on this agenda item. What do my fellow board members have to say about the Columbus Street project?
So, Mr. Chairman, I'll comments. Well, I like the fact that the clerestory's been pushed back from the surface. I like the windows in there, and I think pushing it back was still creating a blank wall now that wasn't there before, which is visible, is not positive to me. So I wish the windows in the front, what would be the north elevation could be reinstalled. I find it interesting that, working with the Philip Simmons group, you know, making a big deal out of that, but then doing an aluminum fence, that makes sense to me. And so I have difficulty with not using a fence that has the character of Philip Simmons and Philip Simmons's thoughts or his group that's going to be involved in the design. I think it should be made out of something more substantial. And, you know, the bringing up the vinyl coated chain link as that's not an option for this location. And I realize that probably is what's used in other locations, but it wouldn't be appropriate downtown. I think that's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Metters. Other board comments? I think the applicant has done what we asked them to do. James, I do agree with you that maybe your restudy with it being set back and having the windows all the way across, even though I know Mr. Clark's very able if he says it limits the utility of the light he was trying to bring in. I certainly understand that, but it's worth looking at. Then again, it's the visibility is so reduced now by moving it 10 feet back. I don't know. I'm rather agnostic about that detail. I'm sensitive to the fact that between the school district and DZA and everyone else, these fences are an issue, but maybe that's worth a detailed restudy on that staff can sign off on. I think otherwise the applicant's done everything that we asked them to do. It's a thoughtful project. It's as sympathetic as it can be to the neighborhood. It's a great repurposing. As staff had previously noted, this is if people want an exemplar of a project that does not gratuitously maximize height, scale, and mass just because it can, this is a perfect example of that, and of the design team being sympathetic to the existing historic structures as well as the neighborhood. I think the applicant, by and large, has done what we asked them to at this point. Further board comments?
When we look at the floor plan, where's the clear story over the story below, so just to. Sure. So is there outline of the clear story here will be ended?
There's not an outline on the floor plan that shows that.
But do you know where it
You
wall
know, the
lands?
elevation- you know, the elevation.
Close to the corridor wall.
Elevation, it doesn't matter.
I thought you were looking at what's visible. It would matter.
Well, I want to see where is the ends, because if the glazing is not appropriate, where is it? Could be, or maybe it's still appropriate. I just want to make sure. Does it make sense?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. That in the sections, I guess.
For the section gives you some idea.
Well, I guess the blank is right there, right?
The second one down.
Yeah. Okay. I got it.
Further board comments or questions?
I think that the whole addition and renovation is actually enhancing the existing building and really complementing the detailing and changing a little bit of the color texture of the brick is helpful to differentiate what is old, what is new. As far as the fence, I guess you're working on it. Staff can obviously weigh on it at the end. So to me, staff recommendation, the final to staff review and permitting is appropriate.
Any further board comment? If not, may I entertain a motion?
I will
Good.
The approval, preliminary approval with staff and board comments, and final approval to staff review and permitting drawings.
Ms. Sobchak, your motion, as I understand it, is for preliminary approval incorporating board and staff comments with final review by staff for permit drawings if all materials have been thoroughly examined and approved, which was the ad-libbing from the staff comments. Is that correct? Restatement? Okay. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second.
Mr. Brown, second, so it's in order. Mr. Metters, how do you vote?
Nay, not in favor.
Mr. Brown?
Yea in favor.
Ms. Sobchak?
Yea in favor.
And myself, yea in favor. Thank you to the applicant. All right, moving right along, agenda item number 404 King Street. Oh, that's fine. Yeah, we'll be at ease for a minute while the Columbus Street applicants remove their material. Oh, that's okay. It's good. It's very impressive. And Mr. White is back from his recusal.
Moving to agenda item number 4. This is 404 King Street, Hotel Bennett, requesting conceptual approval for the new construction of a conservatory on the south side of the hotel on an existing patio. This would be new construction. It's in the Garden District, High District 8, and this is in the Oldham Historic District. This is the location at the northwest corner of Marion Square. And this one's taken from King Street, looking at the hotel part to the right. Images looking into Marion Square with the hotel on the right. All right, we're ready for the applicant.
I'm Glenn Keys, I'm the architect, and I have with me Michael Bennett, who's the owner of the hotel. This conservatory is proposed to be on the site of the existing terrace that's there now. We're hoping to add a little more life to that terrace by having a structure that would be fitting to be in a park setting as well in Marion Square. So we're proposing this new conservatory. You go to the next one, please. So the design borrows from the existing building with the cast stone structure, with hopes doors, and then a glass roof, which would be the conservatory element, with flanking wings that open up into the park as well as to the terrace as well as into the dining room that's adjacent. Next, please. Existing photographs. Next. So the photograph to the right, photograph to the right, that's the bay where the conservatory will. Next. In plan, we're working on the existing terrace, using some of it and then adding the conservatory plus a garden wall that's on the west side and across the south side onto the park. It will have a pierced brick wall with iron gates, so it can be used for private events or it can be open for public use. As you all probably know, that's a popular place to sit outside at the bar, and it will also be used for the conservatory. So there'll be a lot of public, private functions here. Next. Plan. Next. So this is, the hotel is a very large structure, as you can see, so we wanted to incorporate something that respected the scale, but also had to hold its own in size and detail. As I said, we picked up a lot of the detailing from the first floor of the hotel. Next slide, please. And then from the park side, how it sits, I think, comfortably in front of that wing of the hotel. Next. So in context, you can see the rendering that shows it in context to the south side of the hotel, and the next view will be from King Street. So it sits pretty far back, but it still needs to have a presence on King Street, and so we're tying into the existing and working with the existing terrace that's sitting out. So we are requesting conceptual approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Keys. Any questions?
Yeah, just a couple questions. The garden wall, did I miss how tall it is? Like,
Well, it hasn't really been designed yet, but it'll be 4, 5 feet, something like that, to provide some privacy inside. But we just want to show it as a concept that's going to be there. But if it appears, we want to be able to see in there, but also provide privacy for those who haven't been inside.
Further questions of Mr. Keys at this time?
Remind me, where's the garden wall? I know it's not designed yet, but where is it, or where will it?
Okay, you know the site plan. Okay, it's, can you point to that wall down, left?
Parallel.
Parallel.
it's,
That's
here.
the garden.
Yeah, that's
That's
right.
right there. That's the garden. So it just encloses the courtyard. There. Yeah, the original design for that terrace included a garden wall, but it was not built at the time. But now, we're it back with the conservatory. You see the conservatory ties into the dining room, so there is a connection, a condition of space from the hotel into the conservatory.
Kind of reminds me of Nancy Reagan whispering to Ronald Reagan.
Coaching.
So was the garden wall part of the original plan that was approved by the VAR?
That's my understanding.
The garden wall was, yes. The building, obviously.
Further questions of Mr. Keys at this time? Hearing none, does any member of the public care? Thank you, Mr. Keys. Any member of the public care the heard on this item? Hearing none, city.
Yeah, I'm just curious.
Ma'am, would you approach and please state your name and address for the record, please? Okay. That's okay. I'm not trying to scare you off. Just follow the rules. Hearing no more, city staff comments ready.
All right. The proposed structure will be a nice addition to the hotel, both interesting and complementary to the size, scale, design, and partie of the larger structure, as well as its outdoor spaces to the west and to Marion Square in general. The proposed wall and its connection to the conservatory diminishes the presence of the conservatory, which seems to be designed to stand alone with only the hyphen connection to the main building. The wall element should be included in all the drawings rather than only on the landscape drawing. Lower the proposed site wall, omit the operable gates, and increase the width of the site wall openings in order to diminish the effect of closing off the space against the public park. Per lease agreement, all temporary or permanent improvements to Area A, which includes portions or all of the proposed project, require approval by the City of Charleston Design Review Committee. And last, suggest restudy of the patio space to locate the fountain on the axis of the conservatory as well as the axis with the hotel. Staff's recommendation is conceptual approval as submitted, with materials to be examined and discussed with board and staff comments and with the required review and approval by the City of Charleston Design Review Committee.
Thank you, Ms. Parrish. Any response from Mr. Keys or that? All right, board discussion and a vote.
I'm comfortable with the proposal and with the clarifications on the wall and where it's located. I don't think it's going to be a real imposition to the sense of public space there. And if there is a wall, there has to be some sort of gate just for means of egress.
Point of
That's very
clarification,
cool.
I did not say omit gates, I meant omit gates in lieu of openings, not solid wall.
Yeah.
Let me be clear.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, anyway,
That's okay.
I'm really okay with the wall. It doesn't sound like it's gonna be a very large feature. We see it depicted in the preliminary side too.
Thank you, Mr. White. Further board comments, Ms. Subject?
Yeah, first of all, I really like the design. It's English garden, conservatory. The wall is pierced. Yeah, would it kind of be a different style altogether with the rest of the building if it's just pierced brick?
You would have brick piers, yeah.
Yeah, but it seems like different style than rest of the buildings.
And we'd be open to making it ironwork too. We just need to be able to secure that space.
That's just my thought.
I think that's what you're hearing in several of these comments from the board about this fence is we understand and respect the need to secure the property, but because it is adjacent to a renowned public park, keeping the feeling that it is open when the owner wants it to be open is important, so there's not foreboding or oppressive or seems to lock people out. So, and I think you're catching that. Further board comments?
Sure, Mr. Chairman, Lynn, I appreciate it. I think it looks great. And, I think back about some of the great pictures you see of Hampton Park during the exposition of the 1900s. And then you see that, and or around the mall in Washington, we see these one-off little buildings that are just substantially great, or Central Park. So I think it's a great attachment.
Thank you, Mr. Meadows. Further board comments?
I agree with my colleagues that the architecture of the space is beautiful. So my only concern is the height and density of the wall and the ability for the public to engage with the space. The hotel is gorgeous as it is. We want the community to also be able to appreciate it without it being blocked off. But I'm comfortable with the comments made by staff.
Okay, very good. Is there any board member wish to be heard any further? Is there a motion?
No.
Mr. Meadows?
Approval. Board and staff comments.
Mr. Meadows, your motion is for conceptual approval incorporating board and staff comments.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Is there a second? Ms. Sobchak seconds. I'll go down the roll. Mr. Brown, how do you vote on this item?
Yeah, in favor, sorry.
All right. Mr. Meadows?
Yeah, in favor.
Ms. Sobchak?
Yeah, in favor.
Mr. White?
Yay in favor.
And myself, yea in favor. Thank you to the applicant.
Thank you.
Agenda item number 5, 56 State Street.
All right, State Street, existing. '56 State Street is requesting final approval for total demolition of a one-story brick convenience store. This one's adjacent to the French Quarter. Building was constructed in 1984, and it's in the Old and Historic District, Height District 4. As a point of reference, the board did convene at this address yesterday afternoon for a site visit. This is the location at Cumberland and State. This is the building that's up for demolition as it looks today.
I'm going to follow one of Mr. Meadows' favorite rules and exercise my prerogative as a chairman. Is there any member of the public here this evening who cares to speak in opposition to the demolition of the Little Cricket? I don't know what may go on in the future or another agenda item, but is there anyone who wishes to save the Little Cricket?
Also known as the Scotchman.
Yes, sir.
All right.
Yes, sir.
Make a motion for approval. Structure.
I'll second that.
There's been a motion and a second for final permitting of demolition of this structure. I'll go down. The motion is in order. Mr. Brown, how do you vote?
Yay in favor.
Mr. Meadows?
Yeah, in favor.
Ms. Sobchak?
Yeah, in favor.
Mr. White?
Yay in favor.
And myself, yea in favor. Mr. Garris, who saved you a little footwork. Good. But you're still up on the next.
Have extra time.
Nope, you could ask for it.
State Street, the next application is requesting conceptual approval for new construction of a 50-room boutique hotel with meeting space. Adjacent to the French Quarter, Height District 4, Old and Historic District. And this is the location once again, with some context of the area. Okay, ready.
Well, that does prompt a question, Mr. Garris. You have 10 minutes. Would you like additional time?
Yes, sir. Well, thank you. I'm Eric Garris with Bella Garris Architects. And as Ms. Parrish stated, we're here tonight to present the design for a proposed project at the hopefully former Scotchman site for a 50-room boutique hotel product. We're excited about it. It's located adjacent to the French Quarter and just south of the historic market downtown in Charleston, and across the street from the Spectator Hotel and the Luttrell, and also a condominium project that was approved some months ago that'll go right across the street. Next slide. So the existing context is really changing. Just south of the hotel is the French Quarter. You know, it's got a lot of stucco buildings, smaller in scale, more residentially based area of Charleston. Just to the east, which you're looking at the top right corner, is the parking garage located on Cumberland Street, which is a 3-story garage, stucco based. Bottom left is what appears to be a historic single-family residential, but I believe that building was also built in about the 1980s. And then across the street is the Luttrell Hotel and the Spectator Hotel as well. So this falls within the accommodation zone within the city of Charleston. Is allowed a 4-story product with 50 rooms. Next slide. Existing streetscape just shows the massiveness of the mass of some of the buildings that have been constructed in recent years, and then also some of the remnants of lower scale buildings, particularly on the top image to the right, which is the French Quarter. Next image. This one looking view to the south, you're looking back towards St. Philip's Church. We met with that neighborhood group based on some negative press that one of our other projects got, which was a little unfair, but we met with them and explained the project, and they're aware of what's going on here, as well as sending the drawing package to the French Quarter Association. And the bottom slide is just looking to the north. You see the proposed project. In the right-hand side, you see the scale of the other buildings to the left-hand side, the Luttrell, the Marchbank building, which is a historic, more Art Deco building, and against Church Street, some historic structures from the 1800s. Next slide. Again, streetscapes with proposed elevations. Next slide. So again, this project is interesting because if you were to look at the existing site in this slide on the south, on what is actually the southwest corner, but the bottom right corner of the site, there used to be a trolley line that ran there, and that's why that's such an expansive intersection with a 45-degree chamfer. If any of you have ever walked there, you don't know really where to walk. It's not very direct, and it's not very comfortable. And also, the existing Scotchman has a zero entry kind of curb cut, so you can kind of pull across that intersection anyway. When we did research for the project, we actually found that our property lines extended into the right-of-way, what would be the right-of-way, and into the street. So part of this project, we're going to clean that corner up and provide a better pedestrian experience there to one that is really kind of heavily traveled from, Meeting Street along Cumberland Street to East Bay, and then also up State Street to Market. Next slide. We're really keeping the garage entry, which is shown here, kind of in the same spot where the Scotchman would have been. So we're keeping it off of the corner as far as we can. We do have all our parking accommodated on site. And the lobby area, living room, we're addressing the corner with a traditional kind of Charleston corner entry. Living room, lobby bar, main circulation, parking, and everything will go in the rear of the building on the east side. That'll be adjacent to the parking garage where we can't really do very much anyway except varied building services. Next slide. Because of the ground floor allowance, and I'll show you in the elevations, we've added a mezzanine to this that's similar to other projects that we've worked on in the city.
The hotel that we did across the street was permitted before the new zoning ordinance required a certain square footage of meeting space per number of rooms in a project. So we do have a meeting space requirement here, and we're taking care of that on the mezzanine level with a flexible meeting space that I hope will have a connection to the lobby bar downstairs, which will make the hotel more appealing to guests for parties and meetings and whatnot. Next slide. These levels 2, 3, and 4, typical guest rooms. The only exception, go to the slide, the fourth floor, Morris, if you don't mind. The only exception on the fourth floor, you get views above the garage. So, one more slide. We have a small meeting room that makes up the balance of our meeting space requirement so that you get some views over the garage and hopefully towards Mount Pleasant and maybe a glimpse of water at some point. Next slide. So really, for this project, it's a very efficient design that takes advantage of the property area that we've been given. And so what we did, we don't really look at a lot of projects around Charleston, but we speak to kind of the spirit of Charleston and some of the typologies that you might encounter when you're thinking about the design of a project that's on a corner. We don't really have very many mid-block prominent entry, corner entry buildings, but we do have some. So we did look at a corner entry building, particularly one broad down that's farther south from our project. And then also just looking at the rhythm on one broad, you have a very distinctive corner entry, but then you also have a very well-organized kind of rhythmic facade that kind of terminates at its property boundary. And then also Meeting Street here, this is one of my favorite streets because it was going to be used as a slide for a different design for this project that was not received very well. This is the most successful. But it shows a lot of blending and blurring and a lot of regulation and rhythm, and you don't really realize that walking around Charleston, but if you really study it, there's a lot of overlap on our facades that you don't realize. And so treating that pedestrian level in a way that's sensitive to these buildings was something that was important to us. One, because it speaks to buildings in Charleston and other cities in the nation, but also because it creates kind of an energized pedestrian experience, but it also creates something that is timeless, we feel, and kind of fitting in with the context of the surroundings. Next slide. So looking at some of the elements, I mean, we don't have anything near like what's at the top. I'm just using that to show you the blend of kind of a more of a modern radius corner with vertical aluminum fins applied. So is the top right. The bottom left just shows kind of a deep set brick facade, which is what we wanted to do. And then that was the bottom left. The bottom right just shows kind of a glass, structural glass canopy that we're proposing for the entrance that could be frosted and backlit. The next slide. So looking at this, we kind of have a very organized facade that's built on the regulation and rhythm of the rooms inside, because I believe the inside and outside of the building should speak to one another. And so I try to always set up these rules and rhythms and regulations. Where we do have a very tall ground floor and the mezzanine level inserted in between, we tried to create that in a way in which it reads as a single story element, and it doesn't pretend, you don't get the experience that it is additional story, even though it's not a story because it's a mezzanine. And then also we decided to play with how we have some balconies that are interior to the rooms where we have deeper suites, and we've got the ability to do that. But then also some Juliet balconies just to give a little play. And also keeps, we kind of have set up kind of a base and a middle and a top in the way in which we treated the collection of elements, and also on the corner, the bottom, the middle, and the top here. So next slide. We're proposing very traditional materials, just a traditional, maybe a deep red brick with metal panel, very clean lines, very simple edges. Juliet balconies, very, very simply detailed. And on the corner, which is probably one of my favorite parts of the building, is how it transitions around to Cumberland from State, and how we're creating kind of a suspended canopy structure that it resembles the structure of the balconies, but also creates kind of the armature for it to hang from. And then on the corner, creating that more of like a lantern element, and then at the balcony on the fourth level at the corner of State and Cumberland, creating a condition where we have kind of an inverted inversion of levels 2 and 3 that matches more along the lines of what we have on the ground level. In this right here, we are showing a radius glass. We've looked at the plans, and if we get approval tonight and come back preliminary, that might turn into a faceted kind of condition. Only because of it's funny, James. Only because our segments in between where the radius curves is so small, the horizontal nature of the banding would continue to be purely curved, but we would be able to just change the glazing in there in the event that supply chain or production derails procurement. So, next slide. I'll leave that for y'all's discussion. Cumberland Street. So Cumberland Street, really what we try to do, because this is more of our service side of the building, from the garage entrance over, we have a valet set up here, so we only have a one-way in, one-way out. Valet will handle all the parking. We wanted to keep the same rhythm of the building and just simply propose, either solid infill panels or some sort of a frosted or decorative film glazing, so that the building didn't speak to services. It spoke to the urban context and experience, and then where we have to have services, they're just disguised behind these walls. Next slide. That's just a rendered view of it. Next slide. This is the north wall. It's being set back in so we can get some natural light where we can because of fire separation distance off the property line. Next slide. And then the next slide is the against the garage, where you won't be able to see until you get to the third floor. You'll be able to see across. So the building largely is not very visible from the east on this east facade. It starts to become more visible on the north facade. It's purely visible on the south and west facades. Next slide. And then just the building section. Next slide. Just some typical kind of how I think in terms of developing design. You can see kind of at the bottom the glazed structural glass canopy at the entrance with some sort of a backlit glass that would create that lantern effect in the corner. Next slide. Axon from looking northeast. Next slide. Perspective to the northeast. Next slide. Looking southeast. Next slide. Just at a little bit of a large view. Next slide. Next slide. And next slide. Okay. Thank you. Any questions?
Questions for Mr. Garris from the board at this time? Hear none. Public comment on this agenda.
Dana Catherine Carroll with the Preservation Society of Charleston. We really appreciate the applicant meeting with us and walking us through the proposal. And while we stood against this accommodations request for this site at zoning due to the overconcentration of hotels in the area, that use has been approved, and we feel this is a legitimate design solution. The height, scale, and mass are comparable to other new construction projects in the area. The simple, repetitive forms are characteristic of Charleston's architectural character, and the traditional material palette blends well with the historic context. Our comments are relatively minor at the conceptual phase. First, we might suggest studying the rhythm of the bays on the south elevation. Specifically, the one narrow bay feels disruptive in its current location. And we question if this could shift towards the right to act as a hyphen transition towards the less active service-oriented areas of the building. Also, we understand from conversations with the applicant that the tone of the brick selected is intended to have a terracotta hue. However, as rendered, the building reads rather dark and monotone, which gives an overall more heavy appearance. Material samples will be helpful to understand the relationship of the material colors, but we would encourage differentiating the brick and metal tones to help the building feel lighter and bringing in further accents of the railings, columns, ceilings, etc. to provide visual interest and help enliven the building. We look forward to continuing to work with the applicant on these materials and details as the project progresses. We're pleased to lend our support for conceptual approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Well,
Thank you, Justin Schwell with Historic Charleston Foundation. Thank to the applicants for meeting with us several times to review this project. We're generally supportive of the overall conceptual design. We've shared some comments with the design team previously, but we think this can be handled at preliminary level. We would recommend conceptual approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schwebel. Other members of the public care to be heard on this agenda item. City staff comments or recommendations?
I'm gonna make an observation first. The proposed structure repairs the edge of State and Cumberland Streets at what currently is a vast, edgeless, and vehicular-oriented intersection. At a new and tighter corner, the project depicts a recessed entry, speaking the language of historic Charleston commercial buildings. The rhythm and the ratio of solid to void on the facades may lean industrial. However, it should be noted that this area historically housed warehouses, and allowing the past to inform the present is a positive. The Juliet balconies add a residential layer, and their limited use does not overwhelm the project. The proposed speaks a similar architectural language to newly proposed and newly built projects nearby. All right, getting into the comments. Number 1, consider treatment for the north wall to reduce the scale and monolithic effect against the smaller structure. 2, consider if 8-foot tall window and door panels with transoms would reduce the scale of the glazing to be more harmonious with other structures. And 3, staff has considered and reconsidered the odd narrow bay at the south elevation and whether its breaking of the overall rhythm should be highlighted or somehow incorporated into the pattern of the facades. Ultimately, staff has determined that leaving it alone might be best, allowing this bit of subtle levity in what otherwise is a very structured and consistent pattern. Recommending conceptual approval with board and staff comments.
Thank you, Ms. Parrish. Would the applicant care to respond?
Levity, please.
Sure. Sure. Actually, it's interesting, and I'll give credit where credit's due. It's interesting that all the comments are things we discuss in the office because these are the areas of particular, not struggle, but the placement of that single bay on the south facade has to do with the fact that there's a suite behind it, and you've got to make up a deeper room, which kind of breaks the grid. Pushing it farther east on the building would then start to affect the location of the drive entrance, which would then start to affect the area of the elevator, the stairs, and everything else inside. So, what we try to do is to create if you look at the corner perspective, we have a single bay, a corner element, and then a full single bay. And then try to just create that balance about that view, which we thought was kind of the money shot. And then allow it to just fall within it. So maybe it should be studied. I agree. It will be studied. It might be that it's not as prominent, and maybe it just kind of finds a way to recede and then just become more part of the architecture. So I have to give credit to the comments because I think they're pretty poignant. I take them. So.
Lawrence, can we look at that facade again?
Further questions to the applicant at this time? Okay. Board discussion and potential vote on this agenda item.
Well, I appreciate the material palette that's proposed. I really do think that a lighter, brighter red would be even better. You've got some nearby examples like the Wagner building. It's one East Bay that used that sort of brick, and it's beautiful. And it's also very regular machine with super tight mortar joints, which I always find to be really compelling. And this little bay being a little bit different, that really doesn't bother me at all. The only couple things that I think need addressing is that there is a band of brick right above the entry in the corner, right here, that because it sort of reads like a masonry double cantilever, and I wonder if maybe it would be better to just eliminate the brick in that area. And then the other part that concerns me is the north facade. And I understand there's no windows on it because it's a zero lot-like condition, and I understand it's a small lot, but that's a prominent facade that's probably going to be taller than the structures to the north for quite some time, and so you'll see that paneled brick wall from the market. And I feel like that facade needs attention so that it can have more of it step back to provide some amount of glazing there. And I know that monkeys with the floor plans, but the facade being that scale is just, I think it's troublesome. But other than that, I think it's a very elegant, simple, straightforward solution.
So actually, I do like that small bay. Reason why is actually brings you to the corner and prominence of the corner a little bit better rather than same old, same old. So that's one of my comments. The corner, I'm sort of, I understand you kind of trying to reverse top and bottom, but one of your examples where the corner is glass continuous, it actually gives more prominence to the entrance to me rather than trying. So if it's continuous, it's not tall enough to break it like that to me. And that's and the last one, yes, north elevation pretty much. It's that we heard subtractive and additive sculpture. And yeah, that one is very visible. The east one is probably will be blocked by, you cannot see as much, but that one is need a little bit more work.
Thank you, Ms. Sobchak. Further board comments?
Mr. Chairman. I find the red brick to make the project feel very heavy and almost as if not overwhelming. The southwest corner curve versus that radius, that curve of radius, I think it feels too tight. And if we were to go to page 27, that's Lawrence. When I look at this, and there's one that shows it in the perspective also with the brick beside. I can't remember what page that is. That might be 27. This reminds me of a project that we've talked about several times, but the tech center, which we're looking over and we're seeing this massive, wall. It's a different color, and it's much, much more massive than this. But because this has that dark brick color on it, it's the same effect. And I find it, while you can't have windows there, you certainly can have windows there. They're not operable windows. They're not moving into the bedrooms. But it's in the facade. That would completely change that appearance, or some other treatment. And it could be that the way that this photo also shows you how overwhelming this building is to the building to the north, the building to the south, and of course also overwhelming to the building to the east. And it's in alignment with the previous designs, which were done across the street to the west. But this is, it may be the materials that this could be done with the materials could make you feel, or make me feel differently about it. But I find this overwhelming, the way it appears in this.
Further board comments?
I agree with what my colleagues have shared. In particular, and thank you for on slide 21 providing the elevation of the corner entry. That helps me with the scaling of it. And I see what is attempted in relation to what is at 1 Broad Street. But like my colleagues, I would love to see the corner almost extended out to make it a bit more grand, rounded, broader, if you will. As Mr. Meadows mentioned, it does seem a little tight in the corner. Allowing it to flow from the state into Cumberland will give, I think, a much more, give it an easeability in setting. But all the other comments I agree with, the smaller bay on Cumberland Street makes sense, so.
A few remarks, and hopefully not to repeat my colleagues. I'll say in the designer's defense that the car entry on the south facade is one of about 15, I think conservatively, on that thoroughfare. So its placement or its existence does not bother me. The Juliet balconies, I'm not in love with, but I understand why you're keeping them and why you need them for an amenity of a hotel. I think the more they blend into the project, the better served you are. I agree with my colleagues. I like the corner treatment. I think if it were a little more massive, that's a good thing, but I like the glass. But Mr. Garris's comments that were off the cuff about perhaps needing a faceted treatment there, et cetera. I think the success of that design element at this stage is in the curvature rather than some compromise of the curvature with a faceted feature. So I'm well aware of the issues that you were talking about regarding materials, et cetera. I think if you're going to stick with this very curvilinear form, that should not be compromised at a later date. It should be considered pretty precedential to the building. I'm actually surprised that in your slideshow, the F.W. Wagner building wasn't in there, because if you just took that first floor facade, it matches pretty closely to the F.W. Wagner building. And so I think there's the coloration. I think moving to a redder hue as opposed to this browner hue is fine, but the darkness or the massiveness doesn't bother me. Here's why. This is a conceptual review of this project. We're changing from a one-story filling station in that whole block. Anything is going to look massive compared to that, and we have to remember that to the extent that there are zoning uses in that area that are going to change, they are going to change, and they're going to be bigger buildings. I think, as you had said, with the rather condensed site plan that you're working with, this is a successful, efficient treatment, but don't mess with the curvilinear form in that element. Get the Juliet balconies blended as best you can, and consider if you stay dark, consider a redder treatment as opposed to this very brown treatment. Those would be my comments.
Proportionally, the corner is just right for the rest of the facade.
Yeah.
So it's working there.
Agree.
Red brick has so many different hues.
Yeah.
You can find the one which will work. And in the end, this building now is kind of concludes what is already built, the hotel, what is going to be condos and the French Quarter. This whole section is now really proportionally right, matching right to me.
Right. And I think in terms of what is permitted but not built, we in this board, with what we've reviewed on these corners, understand this area is it's just going to be very different from what we see when we walk around there.
And what is that building next on the north side? Next to it, there's like 2-story building. Or something.
It's a little restaurant. The single family.
Yeah, it will go away eventually. But
Can I respond to one or two of the comments, or am I?
Certainly.
Okay. Let me just explain a few of the things. So the corner, when you look at the corner buildings, a lot of corner buildings that we have are single family where we kick the corner out and put a column under it, and we've got a little kind of mom and pop, shop. The corner buildings we have are really on very primary streets. And so I think the way I treated this corner entry was that while these are primary arterial streets, they're within Meeting and East Bay, right? Cumberland is a very heavily trafficked street, so is State, but I don't consider them as primary as Meeting in East Bay. So I tried to treat the corner with that sort of spirit, but not make it so defined that it was monumental. Because I didn't feel like this building needed to be a monumental building. It just needed to be a nice building that was more of a background building, right? Because we get too many foreground buildings, and then we have a city of chaotic just architectures. Everything tries to scream louder than the other. So I really tried very hard to keep the corner restrained within the bay and then just regulate it, but differentiate it. So it felt part of the architecture, but not something that it would stand on its own and be the thing that you focus. Because to me, I wanted the building to just be and just exist as kind of a comprehensive design. And also the north wall, we will study that. That's the same condition we had on the Luttrell, and then it was a parking lot for years, and now it's going to be a multifamily condo project. So there's nothing to say that that won't be there, and I would hate for us to be penalized for lack of something that could come in the future, because programmatically it becomes very challenging to step that facade back. I think treating it differently architecturally, maybe making it look better, maybe trying to do something materiality to reduce the scale and massiveness of it is something. But I would ask that we try and be mindful of kind of the program, because while you don't have purview over the interior, that is integral to the exterior. They can't live without each other.
And I will say in response to that specific comment on the north facade that I'll have to take some umbrage with Mr. Metter's response. Nothing could be worse than that west facade of the tech center. So.
Hey, you know who drew it?
And I mean, the fact of the matter is that Jay and I met up with Eric, with Eddie, and reviewed that with Tori, and what's going to happen there. And the bottom line is, I always appreciate the presentations that Eric makes, but what he brings up is true. Until something else is done, this is a monument building, whether it's intended to be or not. It simply is. It's higher than 3 or 4 sides around it, so it is what it is. And if that changes in the future, it may. But I find that difficult in its current form.
Further board comments? Seeing none, can I entertain a motion?
I'd be willing to do so. I'll introduce a motion for conceptual approval. With staff comments and then with board comments to restudy the north facade. Lighten the material palette. And the Juliet balconies.
Can we look at the top at the corner?
Oh, and the cornice treatment at the Rangers corner. And then one more.
Okay, sure.
To pursue the radiance glass with all vigor.
I think we made that clear, but if we're incorporating comments. But the motion, as I understand it, with friendly amendments, Mr. White, was for conceptual approval with staff and board comments, and specifically to restudy the north facade, to lighten the color palette, to blend the Juliet balconies, to study the cornice treatment at the entrance, and to pursue a radius glass at the entry point. That's correct.
Not at the entrance, but at the
Oh, at the
balcony.
at the balcony level.
Entrance is fine.
Yeah, it'll be all those floors.
Yeah. Very good. Is that accepted as
It
amended?
is.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, motion is in order. Mr. Metters, how do you
So
say?
I want to have just
A discussion, certainly.
just for clarity on
Yes, sir.
positions. The way the building is presented right now, notwithstanding the motion that's been presented and seconded, I find it overwhelming, right? But I believe that with the changes that have been suggested through the motion and the second, that my feelings on that could change, which is why I'm going to support this. I just wanted to if we come to the next round and that still hasn't been addressed, my position on that may change. But, so
I think that's very fair, and I also think that that's a very helpful to the applicant to understand. In addition to that, for the benefit of the public, I know the board knows this is a conceptual approval, so we're talking about height scale, mass general architectural direction. We certainly have some areas of concern, some areas that the architects have agreed to restudy right here. They say they need work, but I think it gets us there for that first level, subject to your qualifications if we really need a legitimate restudy of these particular elements. So that being said, we'll proceed to vote on Mr. White's motion. Mr. Brown?
Yay in favor.
Mr. Metters?
Yeah, in favor.
Ms. Sobel?
Yeah, in favor.
Mr. White?
Yay in favor.
And myself, yea in favor. Thank you for the app.
Thanks, thank you.
May I get 2 points of clarification?
Certainly.
One is, who seconded that? That's quick.
Let's see.
Okay, secondly, the motion reads as, to blend the Juliet balconies.
That relates to
Are you talking about?
John's comment to just make sure that they're not prominent on the facade. A lot of times they're just over detailed and they.
Can you just clarify resetting or facade?
Well, whether it be, I'm speaking for myself, but whether it be some kind of punch treatments, faux windows, maybe with the brick that you have in the paneling that's shown. I mean, one suggestion I can tell you right off the cuff is that if the paneling or inserts mirrored that you see on the other elevations, it might be more successful than the fewer tiers that you have now. Something to
And
give some activation to that particular facade. We understand the design limitations, but to make it as interesting as possible in the possibility that it's going to be visible for 20 years.
I would say even a mural would be even whatever.
Something.
I think
guys, I think this is getting outside of where we should be right now.
Well, and for me, I just want to be able, if you ask me what that meant, I want to be able to know what it meant.
Does that help?
Blending,
Yes.
not mushing together, but de-emphasizing. Am I correct?
De-emphasizing,
Okay,
not making them stand out.
okay, good.
Okay,
We're
thank
good to
you.
go. Thanks.
Agenda item number 7.
All right, agenda item number 7 is 214 to 216 Spring Street. This one is requesting conceptual approval of new construction of 134 multifamily micro-dwelling units with 45 parking spaces. This is new construction in the west side. Height districts are 6 and 3, and then the old city district. And then we've got an aerial for you with the red showing you the location. This is the property now. And this is looking down Spring Street. Thank you. Well, they have to be present.
Thank you, Tori. Jeff Roberts for the development team, who's also, my colleagues are here. And Mr. Chairman and board members, thank you for the privilege of presenting this particular project, which we're very proud of, and just some kind words to Tori and Lawrence, as well as Preservation and Historic Charleston for being, as usual, very collaborative and meeting with us, and all that process makes for a better building. So I'm just going to take a few minutes to give you the context and some background of this project. And it's part of a very long-standing effort that we have been doing on this particular corridor, which started with the Point Set project, which is now the Kempton and Assisted Living, which is a very challenging project, how to get that curve just matching just right. And following that project, which you will see at some point in the future, the old gas station and the Pizza Hut, which we mercifully demolished. Then right after that project, right after that, those parcels, there is a narrow strip of land that belongs to the city of Charleston. The engineering department has purview for those 2 deep tunnel drainage access shafts. And at some particular point, we can go over it later with Tori. We probably intend on contributing to making that a hardscape type of pocket park, so we don't have that as a missing tooth. So from that particular location, we also, as many people would know, we have been very active in the West Side neighborhood for decades and have spent many, many years revitalizing that neighborhood and spent very careful attention on Ashton Street, which is the street just parallel to the north. We probably have done 15 different residential projects on that, all historic restorations at 100% restoration level, some new builds that have gone through BAR Small and have won, as Hannah Catherine can find too, we have won multiple Carolopoulos Awards where they really haven't been given before. So we're very proud of our efforts in this particular neighborhood and this district. What will be shown later in architect Bill Hornoff's presentation at the site is 214, 216 Spring Street came right off Septima P. Clark Parkway and had a cut through in the back of Ashton Street that was fairly wide vehicular access and was often abused and was sort of disturbing to the residential neighborhood. And this plan will show that that access is closed off to vehicular, it's pedestrian access and green space, which we think gives a very, very respectful nod to all of our treasured friends on Ashton Street who we've come to know over many years. We also think the project provides a very proportional height transition from the Poinsett project at the curve to a much taller district at West Edge and to the south of the Meadowwood district, really being the leading edge into West Edge and an urban corridor while providing a buffer to the residential houses on a major highway with 70,000 traffic count. And really the crosstown, as it is negatively said, Satina Peak Parkway, really was cut through by the Department of Transportation in the 60s and cut this neighborhood apart. Lastly, briefly, this is the first project of its kind called a micro unit, and we're very proud to have assisted in writing the legislation along with senior planning and zoning staff. And what that means is these units just represent a slightly smaller unit, prototypically in this building about 350 square feet. So it's a smaller studio, but the beauty of this is it only is applicable to certain districts which are walkable to employment centers, walkable to a supermarket, on a major transit hub, bikeable, and we don't have to design a big parking garage and wrap it by apartments. So it's got some parking reductions which allow it to build some extra architectural abilities to design what we think is a really good building. So having said that, hand the presentation over to architect Bill Hornoff.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Mr. Hornoff.
Thank you. I'll try and run through this as quickly as possible. We can go to the next slide. As Jeffrey had mentioned, this is a micro-unit building. So we have 134 micro-dwelling units with 45 enclosed parking spaces within a base. That's over 6 stories. And it was mentioned that we occupy actually 3 height districts here, and that actually formed the building. We have a height district in the rear, which is 2.5, a small rectangle of 3 in the middle of the site, and then 6. So our building transitions really from a 2.5 height district to a 6 height district at Spring Street. So on the Sanborn maps from 1902, 1944, 1955, you can sort of see it's interesting how the density increases there, obviously. A couple interesting aspects, though. In 1902, there's a little metalsmith that was on the site, which I find kind of interesting. And then we came across this image of Spring Street as a riverfront property, which was interesting, too. Next slide. A view looking west. This is, and obviously the site sits at the northern edge of the MUSC campus, but it also sits at the southern edge of a residential community. And you can kind of see some of the density along Spring Street, but you also have these this one-story fast food chains as well. Next slide. And an aerial view. The top 2 images really are Spring Street before, so those buildings are long gone. The view below kind of represents the site as today. You can sort of see the Kempton under construction there, but also you can see Ashton behind it to understand its scale. Next slide, please. So, the challenge of this site really is to make a transition from the neighborhoods to the north to those sort of densities that you have along Spring Street and to the south. Next slide. So the other interesting aspect of this site is that it has this little hand that extends up and sort of bridges between Ashton and Spring Street. What we ultimately end up doing is that arm that extends up to Ashton becomes a pedestrian access to an amenity space for the building. And so in so doing, we're kind of turning that back into a pedestrian-friendly street where there's now a curb cut and really it's sort of a gravel driveway. And so our intention is to eliminate that, put the curb cut back, and make it look more like a residential entrance. The other interesting thing, and I'm not so sure it's interesting, but the vehicular entrance is only off of Spring Street, so you'll see how we resolve that. Next slide. Now I talked about you can sort of see here's how the height district sort of influenced the building. Next slide. Okay, so, our proposal, is really to route the building to its site by being influenced by the neighbors. This is a streetscape along Spring Street. You can see the Kempton there. I've dashed in a proposal of the future development next to ours. The 212 site is the site that Jeffrey talked about. This is the municipal site for access to the deep tunnel. And then the lower elevation is the elevation along Ashton. You can see our building just in the distance there. Next slide. So, how the building's organized. The building itself is a collection of volumes that sit atop this base. The volumes are broken up into their functions. So the taller green volumes are residential, glued together by the corridors that expand between them. And in this sort of broken accent you see here, we also have, you can see the rear, we also have these 5 one-story micro apartments as well that really are sort of an interface between the Ashton properties and Spring Street. They address both and help us transition between the scale of the properties on Ashton to the 6-story building that we have at the front of Spring Street. The other diagram here shows you how we came to the shape of the residential volumes. These residential volumes, the intention is to really this could have been just one long block because it's a very narrow but long site. And so the idea is to break this up into individual components. And so in that case, but to tie them together so that each individual component looks similar and also carries this sort of residential character, because the fact is this is a residential building. And so you can kind of see how we get to the shape that is influenced by the vernacular of the buildings to the north. Next slide. So each one of these residential volumes has a recessed window plane that provides light for, obviously modest size apartments. As Jeffrey said, they're 350 square feet. So it's a big difference when you have a window that goes from floor to ceiling in 350 square feet than it would be a punched opening. The idea is that each one of these residential blocks then is repeated on most faces of the building. You can see it along the east elevation, but then it continues on Spring Street, obviously, but then also on the west as well. Next slide. And then from the site plan, you can sort of see how this amenity space, the open space that reaches out to Ashton, as I said, is a pedestrian entry into the property itself. And then you can sort of see how those one-story apartments address sort of that transition between the Ashton and Spring Street. Next slide. And at the entry level, at Spring Street, the intention is for us to push the garage back as far as we possibly can, allowing cars to queue up so they're not affecting the traffic on Spring Street. The residential entrance is just to the north, and then the parking function behind it. Next slide. And then just the floor plans. We do have some function at the mezzanine level for the residences, things like laundry and fitness. And then you can sort of see this is the typical floor plan. So the second floor, you can see how the residential units are grouped together and create that sort of residential block itself. And then you can see the 5 apartments off the back. They're set back, so they each have their own individual terraces. While they're connected to the building, and the idea is that they're at their own little homes, really. Next slide. And it's, the floor plans obviously repeat up through the building. Next slide. And next slide. And at the roof level, this green area in the middle is intended to be the location of the MEP equipment, HVAC equipment, obviously. Next slide. So, it's hard to understand a building through its elevation, but I'd like to talk about the materials. The idea is that we keep the palette simple. The base is clad in a black brick, I should say a dark brick, the color that we're still working out. And then the upper portion of the building is clad in zinc. And I have a couple samples. If you don't mind, I'd like to pass them out. Yeah, I think I gave you the wrong slide. There you go. So
It's a pigmented green zinc. Actually, if you turn it over, you'll see the actual what actual zinc looks like. But the pigmented zinc gives it it's sealing the material, but it also gives it this sort of richness that I think is kind of interesting. For me, the metal can be kind of a dead material, but this is a real material. It seems like it has a life to it unto itself. So the volumes above are clad in, as I said, zinc, but they're done in a shingle style. So the intention is again to sort of represent sort of a scale of a residential building. The shingle itself is 18 by 36, so it's keeping in scale with the building itself. But going back to the elevation, you can see how the garage is recessed back. There's some at the pedestrian level. There's the residential function of the lobby, and then just to the left, just to the west corner, is the residential entry of the building. Next slide. And then the east elevation, you can sort of see the repetition of the residential volumes with a gap of the apartments in between with little balconies. The other aspect of this is that the base has about a 14 or 15 foot high green wall. And that green wall wraps around part of Spring along the east and then across the back. And it has several different functions to it. Part of what we're trying to achieve here is a softening of that wall, addressing the fact that the back portion of the buildings on Ashton, we give them sort of green space, and then softening the pedestrian experience on Spring. Next slide. And this is a view looking towards the back. You can see the one-story apartments and then the building beyond that, towards Spring Street. Next slide. And then a view of the west side. You can sort of see the repetition of those residential volumes here as well. Similar to the east, obviously. Next slide. Building sections, you just see how the building is sitting atop the podium. Next slide. The one interesting thing, it's kind of hard to make out in this section, but this is a section through the garage, and the garage is tucked back into the building. Obviously we're trying to hide that aspect of it. Next slide. So as I said, it's hard to look at a building in elevations to understand it. And here you get to see sort of both a profile of the residential volume and elevation of it. The vertical window here is really meant to give some relief to the side of that residential volume, to just give it some openness. Next slide. Next slide. View of the west side. Next slide. And then again at Spring Street, sort of the pedestrian experience of the residential lobby, the residential entrance here, and then the driveway going into the garage. You can sort of see how that green wall, the line of the canopy of the residential lobby lines up with the line of the green wall. Next slide. And next slide. This is a view from that amenity park that reaches out to Ashton, and you can see that it gives you a good view of these one-story apartments and then the six-story building beyond. And then you can see the edge of the existing building on Ashton and how they kind of would work together. You can sort of see how the green wall carries around the back of the building. Next slide. And finally, again, for the materials. The dark gray is this dark material, giving it, accentuating this heavy base. And then the upper portion of it, as I said, is the zinc panels that you have in front of you. And the idea is that for the residential portion of it, we clad it in a shingle. And for the circulation portion, we use a batten with a sort of random pattern to it to suggest sort of the actual function of that enclosure. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hornoff. Any questions from the board at this time? You're done. I'm sorry.
Very quickly, which one is operable and what kind of window?
Which windows are operable?
Yeah, and what kind of window? Is that casement window? Or?
I don't know the answer to that. I think that, of course, we have operable windows, and typically we would do a casement. I mean, if you're talking about the recessed window point, I think if you go back to the glass, so you can sort of see there's what we wanted to do is maximize the light into the apartments, but also provide sort of this fluid nature of the glazing so that there's a combination of, in some cases, you can sort of see where there's a clear awning window that would probably open up. I think our intention is that the operability would factor into the design of the windows. I can tell you that through the process of review, Preservation Historic asked us to sort of simplify the pattern, and we did that a bit, and look, we probably still have some of that work to do yet.
Further board questions for Mr. Hornoff at this time? Mr. Rogers? Hear none. Public comment on this agenda item. Yes, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and board members. My name is Arthur Lawrence, and I live in this community way over 75 years, and work in this community probably over 30 years, and I was the neighborhood president for over 20 years, and to see the growth in this neighborhood, especially this particular spot, and with the green space putting in with the green ivy or whatever there, and the design and the windows. The windows is great. We think that the windows is fantastic because it blends in with the medical district and the west edge. And also, when you're leaving the city of Charleston, it break up the facade on the street. It's just not one particular wall leaving the city. It almost makes you feel like you want to turn around and come back to the city to see how everything's flowing together. And especially, we love the rear of the building. Because if you look at the rear of the building, it looks almost like Freeman cottages that located on the site, the way how the flow with the cottages and how it blend in with the rest of the Freeman cottage on Ashton Street. I think the developer and architect is doing a fantastic job by developing this particular area. And with this, like I alluded to earlier, with the green space, and make sure that probably some of the residents left early because I spoke with them and we went over the plan and they consent to what's going to take place because it's not going to impact the resident on Ashton Street. So I applaud them and applaud the city, and I hope that y'all pass this because this community is growing, and if you look at the big picture of the west side, there's a whole lot of things to come, and this would fit right into the development of the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Lawrence, for those thoughtful comments. Appreciate that. Further public comment.
Anna Catherine Carroll with the Preservation Society of Charleston. We would like to thank the applicant for reaching out and taking meaningful time to meet with us and listen to our suggestions about this project. Much of our feedback has been incorporated into the design, and there's been significant improvement to the proposal since we first saw it early last month. The building is reasonably scaled in comparison to many of its contemporary neighbors, has good vertical proportions that relate to Charleston's architectural patterns, and utilizes a high-quality material palette. Therefore, we're pleased to lend our support for the project at a conceptual level. However, we have some minor comments for consideration if the project moves forward. First, we feel the window-to-wall ratio of the right building mass facing Spring Street needs further study. While we do not oppose an asymmetrical design approach, there is an uncomfortable amount of blank wall space on this portion of the facade, and more glazing should be incorporated. We also would encourage continued study of the east-facing wall at the ground level. The success of a green wall is not guaranteed and will be reliant on regular maintenance. We would suggest incorporating a more permanent solution, such as articulation of the brick or public art, to provide interest to this blank wall, since it faces an open site under easement and will be highly visible. With these comments incorporated, we look forward to working with the applicant on details as it moves forward to the next phase of review. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carroll. Mr. Schwab.
you again, Mr. Chairman. Justin Schwab with Historic Charleston. I'd like to thank the applicants for meeting with us several times to review the project. Similar comments to the Preservation Society, in that we would like to see the green wall portion broken up in some way. It was brick previously, and it was been lightened with the green wall, but we'd just like to see a little bit more detail paid to that long portion along the proposed park. With any kind of minimally ornate design and contemporary feature, the success of this project is going to be highly reliant on the material palette and the success of those materials that have been proposed. So we look forward to seeing how those materials come together at the preliminary level, but we would like to see some greater depth added to the fenestration pattern, particularly on the east side and the Spring Street elevations.
Thank you, Mr. Schwab. Further public comment on this agenda item? Seeing none, city staff comments and recommendations.
Couple of staff observations. Being somewhat similar in its architectural direction and general massing arrangements as the recently approved mixed-use building at 584 Meeting Street proposed by the same team, staff finds that while these projects have similar elements in an arrangement contradictory to some fundamental principles, the building's form is interesting and appropriate in this location and context. And two, a check with zoning shows that while different in form, the arrangement is similar to what has been preliminarily presented at TRC. Sorry about that. And then staff comments. Number one, while expecting that the property to the west may at some point be redeveloped with new taller buildings, address the lower portion of the western facade. And two, it would be beneficial for the board to begin opining on and giving feedback on the unique materials proposed for this project. With that, we're recommending conceptual approval with the board and staff comments.
Mr. Roberts, Mr. Hornoff, any response?
I would fully agree with comment one. We agree.
Thank you. All right, board discussion and potential vote. Questions? I do have a question for Mr. Hornoff. Mr. Roberts, do we know of any other application of this zinc, which I think I like the material, I like the palette, but do we know of any actual applications of this material in Charleston presently? Or maybe my fellow board members can.
I can help you with that. Actually, the reason we're talking about zinc today is on one of my walks, the College of Mathematics and it's on Calhoun, it's not far, just west. Yeah, has zinc shingle, 18 by 36. It's natural zinc, so if you were to flip over the sample, it's that. It had a quality to it that looked traditional, but yet, as I said, had a life to it. So that's where that comes from.
And because this is for consideration by us, not as to anything structural, et cetera, but just appearance-wise over time. Do we know anything about how it weathers?
So the natural zinc has a tendency to weather, and so that you can expect some change. The pigmented zinc is, in fact, a sealer on top of the zinc. So I don't think anyone's going to say it's not going to change, but I think it's more resistant to that.
Is the application is just like siding, or it's a insulated panel, or?
No, it's siding. It's a tight lock shingle. It's not a majority of the building, but it's a substantial amount. It's a nice looking building.
Thanks. Further board discussion.
I'm sorry. Yeah. So it's on the College of Charleston Science Building, and then I'm pretty sure it's on the back across the street too. And zinc weathers very well, and in general application. So I would just kick off board discussion by saying that it's amazing what you can do when your massing isn't dictated by structural marking. I know the massing is really very sculptural, but this part of the city is articulated. It has a lot of that, and it's clear and it's logical, and it relates to the building's use in a very clear and logical way. So I find it very attractive. The material palette, like I was getting into a minute ago, is I appreciate that it's simple. It's related to the medical district, but it's not quite as frenetic as some of the medical district projects sometimes get, like 6 or 7 materials on one big building. And I agree with staff comments, and I really agree with the public comments that were received.
Further board comments.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the presentation. I'll tell you why I struggle with this is because I like the materials. I like the shingle concept. We've incorporated that into a lot of projects that I work on. I like the building. I like the colors, the starting colors. I mean, it's gonna be the thing I like most in that area. I mean, it's like, it's almost like it's too much because it's so good. And now, so I'm struggling with that because it gives me, so that's a difficult thing for maybe you to hear, but I'm trying to work through that. You know, it's large, not as large as it could be maybe, but large. I agree with Jay's comment about not being dictated to by parking or not having a design around parking, which would have made it much more challenging, even though. So that is the struggle that I'm having internally because when I go down Spring Street and I'm looking up, you're going to see it. You know, it's going to be there. And then you look around it, and you know, you're going to see something completely different. So is it really harmonious with what you're seeing as you go down Spring Street and you see things? I'm not sure. But those are my comments.
Thank you, Mr. Metters. Further board comments? I'll jump in. Your modular approach to the units reminds me of Le Corbusier's unit of habitation in Marseille and the modular concept. And I bring that up because most modern architects, when they hear that, they hear somebody say Le Corbusier and they say, this project is going to fail. I'm about to get screwed down. I think that this is a very thoughtful approach, both in the pedestal that you have, which seems to draw from that, as well as the modular approach for the folks who live inside. And as Mr. White is a big fan of saying, it is nice to have an applicant come in who understands that you don't have to build a monolith. And in this case, this modular design that breaks up the massing in a very successful way, which always seems to be the problem in these big projects. As Mr. Lawrence pointed out, this is a very contemporary project, but I agree with him that it's sympathetic to the neighborhood and how you've stepped it up and tried to find a way to blend it into the neighborhood. I'm going to add this comment because you haven't been here to see this for everyone, but if that green wall is going to get approved, there has to be some metric or showing of a support system of how it's going to work because of the number of them that have failed. So I look forward to, in preliminary and other reviews, you figuring out how it's going to work where it has not worked elsewhere. I think it's a successful project, and I'm glad that it doesn't have a parking requirement that would take away a lot of what you've been able to do with the massing. And so height, scale, and mass, general architectural direction, and color palette, especially with the clarifications about the materials, durability, I'm fine with this one. Further board comment?
So I'm in support of every comment. But I don't have a doubt. And here my favorite elevation is Spring Street. It's sculptural and really nicely balanced negative and sort of positive elements in there. And I think again, breaking in on the individual and combined units is working very well, and a lot of glass. That's what South is all about. Is a lot of glass. It's nice. So anyway, I will be in support of approval of the conceptual at this point.
Thank you, Ms. Sobchak. Further board comments or motion?
I'll introduce a motion for conceptual approval with board and staff comments.
Is there a second to that motion? Second from Ms. Sobchak. So the motion is in order. Mr. Brown, how do you vote?
No, not in favor.
Mr. Metters?
Nay, not in favor.
Ms. Sobchak?
Yay, in favor?
Mr. White?
Yea in favor.
And myself, yea in favor. Passes 3-2. All right. I will note, maybe to ease Tori's pain, that what we could do on this next series of items is do what we Robert's rules call an omnibus motion, which would mean that someone would make the motion, since it's really a ministerial act, to extend these approvals for agenda items 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12, just extensions of existing approvals. If someone would make it, say, I would like to make an omnibus motion to individually approve each of the agenda items, 8 through 12, with one vote. We can do that.
I make the motion that you just suggested.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, Mr. Brown has seconded, Mr. Metters made the motion, it's in order. Ms. Sobchak, how do you vote on this motion?
Yeah, in favor.
Mr. White?
Yeah, in favor.
Mr. Brown?
Yay in favor.
Mr. Metters? And myself, yea in favor.
Thank you, Chair.
That was fast.
Would that save you some brain damage?
Great, I love it. Okay.
And now we get to hear from staff as an applicant. Given that they gave us a 13-item agenda,
Okay, so I'm just gonna preface this with, there's a lot of slides here that are here for reference and we can dig down deeper into some of them, but we don't have to. I gave you all, I don't know if you had a chance to read over, so I'm gonna talk about some of the points that were in your staff comments I gave you. And then you have the policy statement draft itself, but I can't remember how many times I've talked about this, so if I've repeated myself, sorry, but we were tasked with coming up with a policy statement for the area where we have demolition over historic materials. That's our purview, demolition over historic materials. And that's north of Line, south of Mount Pleasant, excluding the historic corridor district. So on this slide, it's that area in gray. It's a very large portion of the peninsula. A lot of properties, I've even gotten numbers on how many properties we've got. It's a big portion of what we deal with on a daily basis. Primarily, VARS staff deal with it at the board, and our staff deals with it in the comment center on a daily basis. In the survey that was done up there, which is, we'll get to that, the survey which categorized the properties based on architectural significance was done in 2004. Not every property was surveyed. In 2018, prior to 2018, the VAR and VAR staff had purview over demolition of whole structures that were 75 years or older, and then in 2018, this change was we changed the age requirement to 50 years. So everything 50 years older or older came under purview, and it not only hold building demolition, but also historic elements, any historic fabric, materials, character defining features. And what's happened is that we have applicants come in, we have property owners bring in their applications, and we're forced to look at your desire to remove your windows or your roof or whatever. We have to look at it as a demolition without really the purview over what's coming next, whether it be a whole building, a portion of a building, a window, a door, a column, whatever. So in writing and crafting up this policy, which I'll describe it a little bit more in a second, our goals were to provide clarity for repair and appropriate replacement, flexibility for property owners in material replacement and in the review process. Holistically, we want to look at protecting and preventing the loss of historic building fabric and character, and we are really trying to balance preservation and affordability. Let me see. Okay, if there's any background that you need. Okay. Let's see what other slides. Let's go through the slides. So that's kind of some stuff I talked about. The survey was done in 2004. 2,100 properties in the survey, but the district actually has 4,600 properties. Side note, we need a survey. And then let's go to this survey is available on the website now as of today, so you can look up your property, find your rating. Let's go to the next slide. And this is some information on how the properties were rated in 2004. So they were rated 1 through 4. That's the categories. This bottom number is, you'll see that category 1, the most significant, is considered exceptional property, transcendent significance. These would be the most important properties. There are only 34 in that category. As you go down, you'll see that the number in each category grows. 4 properties were rated as 0. Not sure what that means, but
It just seems to me.
but that's how the survey was done. The next slide.
Wake up one day and somebody's raiding your house. And Brenda's again.
This again, which I'm going to get to the policy, you'll understand why I'm talking about category 1 and 2 versus 3 and 4. Everything that's blue was a cat 3 or 4, and the red ones are categories 1 and 2. So most of these properties are categories 3 and 4 or not surveyed, which is the gray. Okay, next slide. And the policy that we'll get to, I should have talked about it first. We are going to, we're breaking the properties into two groupings, 1 and 2. Most of the properties fall within group 2, and that's all the green. Red properties are group 1. These will relate to the categories I just spoke about. And then we've also identified on here, National Register listed districts. Okay, the next slide. All right, so pause right there. So the policy said it breaks it into groups 1 and 2, and the way that this is gonna what this means is that we're giving a little bit more allowance for material replacement in group 2. Those are category 3 properties, category 4 properties, and buildings that were not surveyed. There's a little bit more flexibility in what sort of repairs that can be made. Group 1, again, fewer properties these are categories 1 and 2 in the survey. This includes buildings individually eligible or listed in the National Register of Historic Places and buildings located within an eligible or listed National Historic District. We've got accommodations for those properties too, but they're a little bit more restrictive. We can dive into that if you want. And then let's go to the next slide. I think the last 3 slides are really possible. Okay, one more thing I want to say.
Can you go back one slide?
Yeah.
So can we talk a little bit about, I guess, helping me understand the last paragraph under group 2?
Sure.
So
Yes.
it could
That's
be-
that's my next statement. You want me to okay, so
And it could be a category 1 or a category 2 building, but if it's been owned by somebody for 25 years or longer, am I thinking about that right?
yes,
Even
you
if
are.
it's category 1 or category 2, it still goes into a group 2 building.
That wasn't my reading of it, but if that staff can tell me if that was what was
Okay.
intended.
And I,
My reading of it was, if it's category 1, category 2, regardless, it's a group 1 status property.
James
The-
is right.
Oh, James is right?
Yeah, because we have a footnote which
Okay.
relates to three little challenging areas. Number 1, property owners who have been in their property for a long term.
Mhm.
Right now, that's defined as 25 years or longer. Number 2, owners with a household income that does not exceed 80% of the AMI. So we've got sort of a means testing in there. And then 3rd, I'm already promoted. Heirs property, primary residence or heirs property, 25 years or longer, and then, and then the AMI issue. Those 2 would knock you down into group 2 unless it's listed on the National Register or contributing to a district. So
How
it
many-
does provide flexibility for some category 1s and 2s, which again is 34 properties in one category and 60 in another.
Registered districts within this part of the city are Instant Home and Hampton Park Terrace.
Do we know as a practical matter how many properties are in category 1 or 2 that would be affected by the group 2 exceptions? Or even a ballpark?
I'm not sure that we have the ability to map that easily, but it's a great question. And I'll get it.
I'm assuming it is small.
I was looking at the Groton report this afternoon, and I mean, y'all may know better, but I think it's less than 30.
Okay, that's, pretty small.
I didn't think it was a lot. I didn't know it was that small. That's good.
But I think that's practical information to have, right? For how many important structures we're really talking about. Okay, sorry, Tori.
That's all right. No, I like the conversation better. There's one more thing. Combination with the policy, we've developed an FAQ. It is in draft form because there are 2 questions that don't have question marks. You're not supposed to miss that. And then we've also taken a shot at a resource page, which this has financial resources and more technical information. It does cite some of the NPS technical briefs. It's access to some of the local, city and local grants, information about tax credits, which I think is a relatively well-known thing for us, but it's not always well-known to the general public. One of the things that we think is important, and it is in this FAQ, but it's really an important bridge that we have not, I think, addressed citywide, is the preventative maintenance. I mean, a lot of, we have a lot of newbies. I don't even know how to say that, but preventative maintenance on your historic structure. That's not something everybody just has the knowledge of. Not everybody grew up in an old home. This is something I'd like for BAR to kind of bridge at some point, but I've taken the first stab at some repair information on here that gives us the ability to, talk about this with an applicant.
I think this is tremendous public service. We can solicit comments. I don't know if we vote to approve it tonight, but I like what I'm seeing here. I think I would like I'm well aware how difficult that can be to map and that you couldn't find it to a certitude, but to maybe figure out a list of affected properties in group 2 that are tier 1 or 2. To the extent we have some information, I think that's very practical. But I think the rest of this is fine.
If it helps at all, there's hardly any Group 1 buildings. In fact, in all of Hampton Park Terrace, there's only maybe 4 Category 2s and no 1s. It's really like instant home.
Yeah.
And because became grant homes, that sort of thing. It's more civic
Sure.
structures. And was y'all's ambition to have this approved here tonight and then approved tomorrow by BAR Small? Was that sort of the timeline that had been? I know y'all are working under some pressure from Broad Street, to say the least.
We're working under some pressure from the city council, but I think it's, let's get some traction on it. Let's open it up for discussion tonight. It will be at BARS tomorrow night. I do expect some discussion there. We have the option of taking everything we hear tonight, tomorrow night, bringing it back to you. We can do a quick Zoom meeting one night where
Let's do this.
don't have time.
Let's do this. Does anyone have objections or concerns?
Sure. Yeah, but it's not the big picture, it's the details. Like, for instance, what was your FAQ? You had a question about the FAQs, or?
Oh, no, I didn't. There's just 2 questions on there that don't have answers.
That's what I meant. Which one were those?
How do I determine if my building is eligible or listed on the National Register of Historic Places? I mean, that's a web link.
Yes,
Okay.
that's something we're working on.
How do I know if my building is located within an eligible National Register? That's a web link.
Okay.
Yep.
So for instance, for me, recently got involved in a project because someone was doing something and secured approvals from the city of Charleston. It went through all the right channels. It included some modifications to the structure that were not visible to the house. But that didn't mean it wasn't important to South Carolina State Archives and History, because they're not subject to what's visible or not. So that was kind of long-winded to say, have we had discussions with Archives and History concerning the overlay of what their expectations are with what ours are, so that this person spent a lot of money and all of a sudden they didn't get that state tax credit, and they were counting on it to get it done. Their fault. Clearly, they're separate deals, but I think that's important, and it ought to be and maybe a conversation said. I know that Building Inspections has had it with their Board of Appeals in terms of FEMA guidelines. And, so they cross paths with the state, so the BAR letter that goes to the state comes back, so you don't have to raise the house if you're hitting that 50% mark. That's become pretty standard now. It has been for years, but more so now because of just conversations with the state. So I mean, I think that's important. And then, we've got a list here of, can I place my windows with double pane glass? Yes, and then everything after that, and then item 1 through 7, gives some vendors, right? Well, the vendors that are good today aren't good tomorrow. And that's not, you can pick it, Anderson, but it doesn't matter who the manufacturer is. They have their glitches, and it just happens. And all of a sudden, a bad run comes out. It doesn't mean they're a bad company. It just happens. But how limiting are any of these lists that are on here. I also, don't see vinyl on here. There's a clad, but most of the clad is aluminum. And there are vinyls that are out now that are, as good or better than some of the aluminums. And that's difficult for me to say here, but the reality is that, and it's more expensive. So this is not a cost item. So I would, like under, can I replace my windows, all of those things, and then is there or other as approved by staff? Not trying to get it to the board.
And the intent of the FAQs is to be more of a fluid document that can be updated.
Yeah, because it says the following are examples of previously approved window products. So the staff would have the latitude to compare a proposed replacement window with other items that are previously approved, and as long as you're checking the right boxes with profiles, dimensions, light cuts, the proper means of stimulating the divided lights, like you would probably be able to accept any manufacturer if they met certain.
Well, that's kind of where I was going with that also. Those profiles are not going to match.
Yeah.
It's going to might be close, but they're not going to match.
Yeah.
And then the replacement of your wood siding, cementitious siding of a similar size. What's similar size? I mean, what is that? Right? And so who's making that determination? And profile. Because it's not going to be bad. What I have on my house, my house and Jay's house might be exactly the same date, time, built by the same person. Profiles of one may not be exact. But I think it's perfectly appropriate for us to use the same window when we go that way. So there's just, when you get down to the deal, we're trying to make it, at least in my view, we're trying to get it more in staff's hands than having to come to the board. That's what the goal is.
Totally agree on that.
And,
Let me, acknowledging that, everyone acknowledging, including Tori acknowledging that the FAQ needs to be tweaked, expanded, cleaned up. As to the policy statement itself, and we've had about how many properties are actually affected that would be group 1 or 2, which seems to be concerned. Jay has good anecdotal evidence, not me, which I agree with. The policy statement in and of itself, any objections or concerns about it?
I get to a specific. If you go to the last paragraph, it says note some materials such as vinyl siding and windows and commercial metal roofing. Just stopping right there, I can get you to a commercial metal roofing project, which is a 5B. And 5B is approved 2 paragraphs up as a replacement roof. So we've got to work through some of those details where it's, it's suggesting it's incompatible in that last paragraph because it's a generic statement.
But we could say may not be approved rather than will not be approved.
Again, I don't know about the legal part, but I'm just giving you that. I can give you a 5B roof that's commercial that would be perfectly fine on this residential house.
I think I'm comfortable with the policy statement. You can always, you can take the 1,200 words or so this is, and you can always find some way to smith it a little bit better. But I think it's important for us to remember that for the vast majority of properties that would be affected by this statement, they're in VARS territory. This is one of those policy statements that VAR large may rarely, if ever, implement.
That's what I was thinking. VAR small a lot, not us.
Yeah. But I'm comfortable with the way it is, and I think that it's important too to remember that since this is something that the board is instituting, it's a policy statement and it's not an ordinance coming from council, that gives us the ability to return to it at any point in the future if it's found to be deficient.
It's a really good point that we're talking about VA large versus small because I live with some of those people that are on the board. It's I may be, some of my comments are probably directly related to conversations that I'm having with them. Like you can use it as a replacement product, copper or galvalume that has a turned ridge or it has turned seams. And turning seams is one thing. Turning a ridge, which is perfectly doable, but it's completely different. And there's a lot of complications that come along with that. It's absolutely doable. We just completed one, but it's hard. The perfect sample that you have here, we did in our shop, standing on a concrete floor while we were doing it, not up on a 10, 12 pitch roof trying to turn that ridge. And so I agree that it has to be a replacement product because we're gonna have a hurricane here one day and we need to have some pre-approved products that we can go to or there's gonna be a problem.
That's right.
So
You got to get ahead of it.
you gotta get in.
And James, I think all of your comments and questions were very informative to catching blind spots. So do we want to vote tonight and then come, oh, I'm sorry.
I don't know if the public needs to speak, but I would just personally say two more things. I think we're trying, there's still the question of form and protection of form out there. But a lot of these things were written in here with the understanding that, I mean, I know all of you can see those changes from the sidewalk. But, you know, as long as the profiles and the texture and the sizes and the lights and grids and stuff are replicated, I think we're keeping sort of that texture and fabric. We're just allowing for modern material replacements. And two, I already forgot, so I'll stop and see if the public wants to speak. It's gonna come to me when I sit down.
It's that one word though, replicated, because I mean, it's not gonna be replicated, it's gonna be close.
Yeah.
And I mean, and I'm good with that.
I think that's just,
But
I think that's an acknowledged reality of it. There's no way around that. I mean, Jason Sacker and I were having a beer talking about this, and he said, what is the cheapest way to replace a rotten wood window? I said, another wood window, but a cheap one that's gonna last for 5 years. So, you know, and it's probably not gonna match any better than anything else. Well, I mean, all that said, I think the preservation community has stuck around because they probably want to talk. I don't know.
So good, the public has the floor.
And I'll say one more thing.
Not yet, not yet. No, that's you to it.
Okay, so it is rare,
Yeah.
but there are occasions, and this is something worth considering, where, you know, we say no, you can't remove your windows, you gotta keep them, they don't get repaired. And that decision leads to more demise and more neglected properties. And so we're hoping that we can catch some of those with the policy too. Okay, I'll stop. Thanks.
No, that's all very helpful. Thank you for coming back from that. So, thank you for a great presentation. Members of the public wishing to be heard. Mr. Carroll.
Okay, Anna Catherine Carroll with the Preservation Society of Charleston. We have been closely engaged on the development of this policy, and we urge the board to support the policy statement moving forward with it. This evening, we do have a couple of thoughts to add regarding the supplemental FAQ sheet that we do feel needs refinement. The current question and answer structure is a bit challenging to follow, and more information could be provided on pre-approved materials for other elements discussed in the policy statement beyond windows, such as siding and roofing. And these products should also be thoroughly vetted by members of the BAR with opportunity for local design professionals to weigh in. Greater clarity on these replacement options will provide transparency to the public and allow the majority of applications to be handled at the staff level without being elevated to board meetings. So while the information contained in the FAQ sheet is highly beneficial, we feel it should be tabled for further development and stakeholder input, but we are highly supportive of the policy statement that we think really reduces barriers for low-income property owners and strikes a balance between offering flexibility for replacement materials while ensuring that neighborhood character is maintained. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carroll. Mr. Schwebler.
Thank you again. I'll keep my comments brief so I don't step on Anna Catherine's toes. Again, we're very supportive of the policy statement that's been developed by BAR staff. HCF and Preservation Society have invested a significant amount of time addressing the issues in this particular area. We've worked on a cooperative project over the summer to try and do a lot of research and investigation to the impacts of the demolition purview in this area. With regards to the separate categories, we've kind of found that the impacts to category 1 and 2 structures with the allotments with the AMI adjustments in 25-year would probably be pretty negligible. So we're supportive of that condition as well. But we look forward to addressing the further study of this policy statement and the FAQ sheet as well. Thank you.
Very good. Technically, you have the ability to respond.
I do. I'm going to take all 5 minutes. No, thank you.
Okay.
I would reiterate, I'm sorry.
You can
I'm sorry. I have to commend the advocacy groups here because they did a thorough deep dive into a lot of the stuff that's not in this policy statement, but shapes our thoughts on who benefits from it and who doesn't. And so thank you. No, we didn't talk about that tonight, but it was a very well-researched topic.
Excellent, good. Glad to hear that as usual. Yes, James?
So, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to ask for some freedom for these guys to weigh in on what I'm about to say. I'd like to know if we were to take the scenario that happened at my house, how it would be addressed in this document. Because if it's addressed in this document, regardless of how it's addressed, I'm good with it, right? I mean, good or bad or whatever, but I just want to make sure it's addressed.
Okay.
So I had a clay tile roof on my house, which was an outstanding feature. The underlying support was no longer supporting that clay tile roof. So I took that clay tile roof off, and John Moore, structural engineer, Mike Gant, structural engineer, both wrote letters. Yeah, you can't put that back on that roof. Right? But ultimately, had to go through a lot of work with the city in order to get approval to put a copper roof on the house. I love clay tile roof, but I was not willing to sacrifice all of my frame material that was original to the house just to put a clay tile roof back on the house. I felt like that was gold. I was getting rid of 95-year-old historic material in order to put a new clay tile roof on. But it was the right thing. The process that we went through was right according to the guidelines and ordinances. How would that change with this new document that we're adopting here? I mean, y'all worked on this too, so how would that change in terms of there was no answer for it? In other words, it was as if I had taken it off, but there's no, you can't have taken it off, but you have, but there's no answer.
I remember all that. And my read of this is that properties in Group 1, because it's contributory to the National Register District, and the only thing that staff can approve is replacement of historic materials in kind. So if you have a unique circumstance where there's a structural failure underlying, that would probably have to go.
Which is okay, but the board currently, previously, the board couldn't hear it because they can't approve demolition of that material. In other words, they couldn't take any action on it. I mean, it was as if the roof was still on it, and it wasn't. Or does this open it up so that you can actually go to a board and get approval for it? There were, y'all help me out with how, because
you could appeal a staff
Was this
decision.
prior to 2018?
it didn't work. I mean, the board wasn't, they didn't have the purview to, you can't demolish a roof. I mean, you just couldn't demolish a roof. That was what.
It was more that there was no purview over what went back.
No purview for what went back. Right.
So I
Okay.
think this does satisfy that issue.
Then if it does satisfy that issue, then I'd be okay with it. Because somebody else is going to get in the same situation, and you need to be able to get an answer.
Well, that's fair.
I would say, that's a unique case, and I'm not familiar with the property. We did some address testing on previous projects that came to, we did five properties that come to the DAR, and you pass this around, just, what would happen pre-policy and what would happen with policy in place.
That's great.
Should we copy that?
That's okay.
So this is listed as one agenda item, and the agenda item is specifically the policy statement itself. So
Right. I would say to the extent it's not clear, I feel comfortable, and I don't know about the sense of the room, maybe we can take it. I feel clear passing this policy statement tonight with the knowledge that we're severing the FAQ because everyone agrees that it needs work input, and staff agrees they want to clean that up, just to get the policy adopted.
I agree with that.
To get the sense of the room, is anybody opposed to adopting the policy statement?
I'll introduce a motion to approve the policy statement as submitted.
Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Brown seconds. We'll go down the roll. Ms. Sobchak, how do you vote?
Yeah.
Mr. Matters? Okay. Mr. Brown?
Yay.
Mr. White?
Yay.
Myself, yea in favor.
And I'll abstain, and then we'll move forward.
But I was the first to have the opportunity to read that. I think if you read that as I did, the very concern you have about substitutionary materials being applied has in fact happened in some cases. So, all right, very good. Passes with the 4 yeas and an abstention. Thank you all very much. We stand adjourned. Thank you, staff, for hard work.
Is anyone going to see the union